Welcome back to 28storms.com. I am Jason Moreland. This is your tropical cyclone update for this Friday, February 18th, 2011. Taking a look at the latest infrared satellite, we still see the remnants of Tropical Cyclone Carlos over the northern territory, and it's still providing very heavy rainfall for that area, so the flooding threat still persists. And that storm isn't going to completely wind down anytime soon. We're going to get more into that forecast in a few moments, but in general, it's going to track over toward the west-southwest. And then over here we have Tropical Cyclone Diane, which is obviously becoming better organized and much stronger as the equatorward and poleward outflow channels really begin to expand. You can really see that the upper level conditions have become much better over the last couple of days. We're starting to see the fanning out of the cloud tops, which is an indication of strong upper level ridging. And of course, you can see that much better on the latest water vapor imagery as well, with that really fanning out of the outflow channels. We still have that strong upper level ridge aloft dominating much of this area of the Southeast Indian Ocean. And we still have the secondary area of upper level ridging over the remnants of Carlos. Here's a quick look at the latest infrared image for the remnants of Carlos. And I mean, this is a really persistent circulation. It's been over land throughout much of its duration. And that's going to remain to be the case for the next couple days. There's an outside chance that it will get into some of these inlets of the Timor Sea, though, up into the Gulf area. And in fact, the Bureau of Meteorology is forecasting Carlos to once again be upgraded from a tropical low to a Category 1 within about 36 hours. So that's going to give it more time to get its act together before making a secondary landfall over Western Australia. And even by that point, all may not be said and done because there's still an outside chance that it makes yet a third appearance over water down the road north of Western Australia, and we'll get into that in just a second on some of the latest forecast models. Here's the latest radar out of Wyndham, Australia, and as you can see, that persistent circulation is still maintaining itself pretty well, and over the next couple days, this rainfall is going to start to spread over more toward the west, so areas over here have been pretty lucky so far, but that's going to change over the next couple days, and we will see an increase in the precipitation. Hopefully it won't be as terrible as it's been over in Darwin over the past several days, but once again, we expect the moisture to even increase further as it begins to tap into some of that fuel from the ocean once again. So we'll just see how much this radar begins to light up over the next day or so. This is the latest microwave scan of Carlos, and as you can see, this low-level circulation is still fairly well defined. And the reason why it's still fairly well defined despite being over land for so long is because the upper level conditions are so favorable. If this were under strong wind shear at the moment, we would not be seeing such a persistent storm. But this also means that any chance this storm still gets in the future of going back over water, it should intensify fairly well. And the Bureau of Meteorology has also noted this in the technical discussions and the tropical advice statements that they've been issuing. They've noted the upper level favorable conditions, and if it does get back over water, once again they expect it to become a Category 1 in the Gulf before making the secondary landfall. And then even as it continues to march on to the southwest, we'll have to watch it as it continues to hug the coastline. Now here's the latest infrared of Tropical Cyclone Diane, and once again we've seen a lot of improvement over the last 24 hours, not only in terms of outflow, but if you also notice the primary circulation is now located directly underneath some of the coldest cloud tops. Yesterday, most of the convection was off to the northwest due to some slight southeast shear, although it wasn't that prevalent. So we're seeing a very good intensification phase now underway. Here is the latest shear map from the SIMS website, and as we noted before, the upper level conditions over Carlos are still fairly good. That's why the circulation is remaining intact. And of course, we have the second pocket of upper level ridging that's been very persistent for the past week. And you can see the both of the upper level ridging cores located directly over both of the systems that we're watching. So where are these storms headed? Well, first of all, here's the Bureau of Meteorology forecast for Carlos. It's going to be entering the Gulf within the next 24 to 36 hours. Once again becoming a Category 1 based on this forecast. So areas in this general vicinity need to be ready for the return of gale force winds. Currently there's no gale force winds in this area, but once it gets back into the Gulf, those winds should begin to increase once again. Perhaps more important in the next couple of days will be Tropical Cyclone Diane, as it's really forecast to intensify pretty well. It's forecast to become a Category 3 on the Australian scale. This is the latest forecast from BOM, and it's supposed to parallel the coast throughout much of the period. But they're also warning that areas along the coast need to be ready for the potential for flooding in low-lying areas along the coast because the wave heights will really begin to rise, and it's going to get really rough along the coastal areas, so you need to be ready for that. Anywhere from Exmouth down to Coral Bay, down to Cape Cuvier, and once again, I apologize if I'm abusing some of these names. And here's the latest forecast from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. They're also forecasting a pretty good amount of intensification. Uh, with wind gusts in excess of about 100 knots by the 19th, which is about 2 days from now. So it's also forecast to parallel the coast. The models have been waffling back and forth in terms of the scenarios. Yesterday they began to trend back toward the east, toward the coastline, and now they've once again taken a shift back toward the west, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Before I do that, however, I still want to emphasize that all residents right along the coastline, as long as you're in the margin of error between the two tropical cyclone forecast tracks, between the Joint Typhoon Warning Center and Bureau of Meteorology, you should take all precautions just in case you actually do encounter cyclone force winds, because if that track were to shift, it's going to do so fairly quickly, right up until landfall or right before landfall. So be ready now just in case anything were to change. So here's the latest forecast from the ECMWF model. We still have a decent layer of ridging over the central U.S., but we also still have a small weakness, which is basically a trough of low pressure over southwest Australia. If this were any stronger, it probably would begin to curve Diane closer into the coastline. By 24 hours, however, we begin to see a small pocket of secondary ridging in this general vicinity, ahead of a secondary, much stronger trough that's really not in the frame just yet. By 48 hours, we begin to see that secondary pocket of ridging a little bit better. So the initial trough, which isn't that strong, bypasses both storms to the north, and a secondary area of smaller ridging begins to develop in this area. Now we see the much stronger trough beginning to approach from the southwest. By 72 hours, we begin to see why the models are starting to turn Diane more out to sea. So we have the secondary area of upper level ridging, and of course the flow around the ridge tends to be in this general direction, whereas we have the trough, which also encourages flow to streak toward the southeast. So this is going to create a weakness more toward the south here between the ridge and the trough, and that's going to allow the storm to curve more toward the south. By 96 hours, we begin to see that happening. The ridging is a little bit more prevalent in this general area, and we're creating a flow in this general direction for the storm to travel in. By 120 hours, you see the storm beginning to become absorbed by non-tropical features to the south, and it begins to really fall apart and dissipate. By 144 hours, you really can't make out the tropical cyclone anymore, as it's now more than well absorbed into the non-tropical trough. But I should also call to your attention, if we back this up by a few days, by 48 hours, the remnants of Carlos are still hugging the northern coast of Australia, and we also have a secondary area of low pressure developing near the Solomon Islands. We've been talking about this for about half a week now. And by 72 hours, this is the latest run, and it's beginning to take Carlos back into open waters. So this is still going to be the system to watch for Western Australia, or at least the northern areas to the east of Port Hedland over the next few days, as Diane begins to bypass most of those areas, and we have the threat for the flooding rains to come about with this tropical low / Carlos. And we have the developing storm out by the Solomon Islands. By 96 hours, Carlos is back over the Indian Ocean and beginning to intensify before turning toward Cape Coral and Exmouth. And by this point, we have our near severe status tropical cyclone over the South Pacific recurving to the north of New Zealand. This is the latest spaghetti model runs for Tropical Cyclone Diane, and as you can see, just about all the model guidance is in agreement with the latest ECMWF run that I just presented. The storm is still forecast to come fairly close to the coastline, so areas still need to watch it. But yes, the model consensus keeps the inner core just off the coastline as it begins to recurve ahead of that secondary major trough. Here's a look at the latest intensity plots, and overall the models still try to take Diane to 70 to 80 knots before becoming absorbed by the non-tropical trough to the south. These are the latest plots for Carlos, and over the next several days, flooding is going to be the main threat for these areas as it parallels the coast and continues to receive a source for moisture to persist. And here are the latest intensity forecasts. So go ahead and ignore this line because that's erroneous, but if you go ahead and look at the consensus, Yeah, the models keep it between 30 and 40 knots over the next several days because there's always a chance that it could tap into that moisture some more if it gets further off the coastline. So we're still going to be watching the remnants of Carlos fairly closely for the next week. Last but not least, we've been talking about this potential for the past several days, and now we finally have a tropical disturbance worth looking at on satellite imagery. The models have been advertising this for quite some time now. We're looking just east of the Solomon Islands, and we're beginning to see an organized mass of convection beginning to consolidate, and therefore the surface pressures are going to begin to lower as long as the convection persists in one area. And it's very likely that we'll have our next tropical cyclone within the next couple days, originating from this massive convection that you're looking at right now. The model still forecasts to become a fairly potent tropical cyclone. As of right now, it looks like some portions of the Solomon Islands may receive gale force winds over the next couple days, and it's going to strengthen as it begins to move southeast. As of right now, it doesn't look like we're going to be seeing any direct hits from this storm. Once it becomes a really intense cyclone, it's probably going to stay out to sea as it begins to move away from the Solomon Islands. But nevertheless, we're still going to really have to keep a close eye on what this storm decides to do. And later this evening, we're going to post another update with more model information about this storm, and of course another update on Carlos and Diane. So thanks again for checking out 28storms.com. We hope that you're enjoying these videos. Please subscribe to youtube.com/28cyclones, and also visit our Cyclone page at 28storms.com/cyclone for the latest information that's all combined into one page, and it's from sources all over the internet combined into one page so that you can access all the information fairly quickly. So once again, tell everyone that you know that may be interested in our videos, or if they have an interest in what these storms are doing, go ahead and let them know about our page. Try to spread the word if you really think that it's worth it. And thanks, and check back again later tonight.